And I will keep monitoring the waiting room for other people that wish to come in. We'll get started in a minute. If you have a question for Zeke, now is a good time just to think about that question that you might want to ask. We'll give it.
People getting okay, no one can leave. Yeah.
For those of you joining us online, welcome. We're getting started here in about 30 seconds. Clark, can you see? Okay, good.
My sister's not being let in.
Okay, is she in the waiting room? I see Viviana, is that her name?
Yes.
Viviana's in the room. According to us here, Zoom meeting. All right, well, let's get started. Thanks everyone for joining us this evening. My name is Deacon Jack Karn. We're here for a very important conversation about immigration, and I'm glad you're here. This is a really great opportunity for us to talk about an important issue that's been important for a very long time, but has taken on, I think, maybe new prominence with how much it's been in the news over the last few years. And this is intended to be a place of curiosity, a safe space for us to ask questions and to learn and to grow in Christian community. So welcome, everyone. So I'll invite Jess and Louisa, our co-chairs of the Migrant Interest Group, to introduce the Migrant Interest Group.
Louisa's going to take it. Oh, okay. I'm going to stand over here. I think that's easier, right? Zeke, can you see me?
Yeah.
Okay, great. All right. Well, I'm one of the co-chairs. There are three of us, Jess, Lynn, and myself. And when, in this case, our group formed because we had an influx of Venezuelan community coming in, and we saw the need to help and to do what we could as a parish to help people. Jess was really a great lead for us when it came to that, and some of the things that we've been able to do this year, our team, and it takes a lot of people. It's not that we have some people here who have been part of that team, but some of the things we were able to do to help was we were able to help house 3 families. Jess and a whole team of other people were able to find furniture. Deacon Jack was able to get transportation passes for them so they could commute to different pantries in different areas. We were able to enroll them in school. We were able, other parishioners were able to give the kids bicycles and toys and books. Other parishioners like Kathy were able to help find out how we could help the adults learn English, so ESL classes. And so we just kept doing what we could as a group. We would drive to where they were. We would bring them to church. They were able to participate in the art camp this year. They were also able to participate in other services that we had. And so we really tried to just welcome them and show them that we understand their people and there's a need. And so we tried to connect them as best we could with a attorney, a U.S. attorney that dealt specifically with immigration issues. So they were able to do their asylum paperwork. And in doing that, They will eventually be able to get working papers so they can work. Many parishioners came to the call and helped make sure that they had jobs, minimal jobs, right? Like help me move this furniture, help me clean my backyard, help me clean my house, just jobs like that. But in doing so, you left people with a lot of dignity because they don't want to come here and just take things, they want to work. And I don't know what we need to do except maybe change our policies with immigration. That's my own personal opinion. Of course, some churches or anybody else's. This is my own, but our group really heeded the call of being a good neighbor, a good Samaritan, and we did what we could. So having here Zeke today really helps us understand better what immigration is about and how immigrants do make a difference in our community. So we're so grateful that you were able to come here today. So that's part of what our group has done. And we hope you all continue to help and do.
Yeah.
Thank you.
you.
Thank you.
Um, Okay, well, thanks, Louisa. It's a new ministry. It's been formed under a year now, but we're growing, and this is part of our initiative to educate ourselves and to learn this. So we have got an expert here, right, Zeke? So I want to welcome Zeke Hernandez. Zeke is a professor at the Wharton School of Business at the University of Pennsylvania. His pioneering research links immigration to investment and economic growth, and he's won multiple prizes, including an unprecedented 3 emerging scholar awards and top academic associations in his field. But Zeke was born in Uruguay. You can come in. Oh, he's locked out. Okay. And because of his father's work, he spent part of his childhood in Costa Rica, Guatemala, and Argentina. Later, he had 2 years as a service mission in Buenos Aires during the deepest economic crisis in Argentina's history. There he witnessed grueling poverty and suffering that made such a deep impression on him that made him want to understand what does indeed lead to economic prosperity, what do countries need to do. So that's been his mission. He's been studying this for 20 years on what creates prosperity for people and society. And what he came to see in the models for economic growth is that they weren't really measuring how people affected the economy and the movement of people, which Zeke will talk about is essential to prosperity. So he's come out with a great book. So I had to read it. I learned about you from Strangers No Longer, Zeke. So that was a Catholic organization in Michigan.
Yeah.
And his book is a fascinating book. And so what Zeke's going to do is he's going to talk for about 20, 25 minutes, give us kind of the overview, and then we're going to have an interactive session of Q&A. Okay, thanks, Zeke.
Yeah, thank you. That's a wonderful introduction. Are you ready for me to start, or do you have any other business to do?
Oh, that's it. We're ready for you.
Okay, great. Well, thank you for having me, and I'm honored to share this evening with you. I also don't take it for granted that you're spending an hour of your time listening to me. You could be doing lots of other productive things with your time. And as a fellow Christian, I also want to thank you for what you do. The story that Jess shared about helping these newcomer families and just the work that you do in general in your community is inspiring to me and I think reflects well what Jesus tried to teach us to do. So I appreciate that. Um, I'm going to try to keep my remarks as short as possible because I always prefer to engage with you and hear the questions that you have and the concerns that you have in mind. And so I'm going to try to keep my remarks short. Um, I think what I want to do to try to illustrate the point of what I've learned in 20 years of research and what I'm trying to embody in this book that I've written is I want to tell you a story, one of the stories from the book, and use it as a microcosm of much bigger issues that are on the ballot next week and that are always relevant, whether it's an election year or not. Um, so Let me start by making the story a little personal. When I came here to the U.S. To study, I came here to go to college, and as you know, I'm from South America. Um, and I remember finding many things about life in the U.S. A little bit different. And one of them was this whole idea of dating, and how do you do this? It was just culturally very different. So I got my first date in the U.S. This way, not because I did anything, but a girl who was a friend of a friend approached me, and she said, "Hey Zeke, you're from Latin America, so you know how to dance salsa, right? So when are you going to take me salsa dancing?" And I thought, well, that's kind of interesting. And I paused in my head. And of course, I didn't say any of this out loud. But in a split second, all of these thoughts went through my mind. And I realized that she was assuming that, all people from South America can dance salsa. Therefore, Zeke can dance salsa. And what she didn't understand is that young men from my part of the world who arrive in the US on scholarships are not exactly the kind who spent their nights and weekends going to salsa clubs. And I thought, well, I can tell her this and there's going to be no date, but, she's cute and I like her. So why not? And so I smiled and I said, sure, I'll take you salsa dancing. Big mistake, of course, because I didn't know how to salsa dance. And, I had to figure out where there was a Latin club near where I was going to college. And then my sister tried to show me a few salsa dance moves that I did not learn. And we show up at the club, and the lights are dim, and everybody's dancing beautifully and gracefully. And my heart sinks because I know that I can't dance that way. And as soon as this girl and I start dancing, her heart sinks because she realizes how wrong she was about what she had assumed about me. Anyway, it was a pretty embarrassing night. Needless to say, there was no second date. And I've learned to laugh about that with hindsight, but it was not that funny at the moment. You're wondering, well, why am I sharing this weird story with you? Um, and it's for the following reason. This girl assumed, in the same way that I had, that salsa was something that was created in Latin America. And that's what I thought too. And that's why I partly felt embarrassed that I don't know how to dance salsa. Now, I don't know how many of you like that kind of music. Maybe by show of hands, I can see some of you. Does anybody like salsa by chance?
I like salsa.
Yeah, I see some hands going up. Does anybody know where salsa was created? Can anybody guess?
Spain.
Spain is a good guess, but that's not true. That's not where it was.
Miami, New York.
What was that? Cuba. Cuba's a very good guess, but it's not Cuba.
Miami.
Yeah, Miami's also a good guess, but it's not. So the answer is actually New York. It's Brooklyn. Okay, that's right. Viviana, you got it. New York City. So salsa is actually the way it happened is that a bunch of Latin American musicians from Cuba, Dominican Republic, mainly islands, but other places, had settled in Brooklyn and they started jamming and playing music and mixing sounds. And they started jamming, of course, with US based musicians, New Yorkers, Jews, others. And out of this mix of different musical styles arose this new thing that didn't have a name. This was during the late 50s and early 60s. And this music started to become a bit popular first, kind of within Brooklyn in this small community. And then a man named Johnny Pacheco, who was a Dominican immigrant, realized that there was no record label that was willing to record this music because they just didn't get it. So he and a New Yorker, a Jewish New Yorker um, from who was born in the U.S. They formed a partnership and they started a recording label called Fania Records, okay, in 1964. In 1964, they record the first salsa album in history. It's called Cañonazo, which means cannonball shot. And the record is an instant hit in the East Coast and not just in Latino communities, but just in general. And so this musical genre starts to become very popular in nightclubs. They start going on tours. um, to play this new kind of music. They fill Yankee Stadium, which tonight is filled for the World Series. Imagine it being filled with people who are listening to this new kind of music for the first time. They go on world tours. Fania Records starts signing legendary artists like Celia Cruz and Tito Puente and others, and salsa becomes a thing. Okay, and over time, of course, it got exported and mixed and remixed, and most people, because of the kinds of sounds in that kind of music, thinks it was invented in Latin America. Now, you might think this is just a silly story or it's a very nichey thing. What does it have to do with immigration and the issues that we're so hotly debating right now? And the point is that it has everything to do. This is a perfect microcosm of what immigration does for you and me. Okay? Um, think about all the economic and social and cultural ripple effects of an innovation that arose because of the interactions of natives and immigrants who just brought something new to our country and brought something new to our culture. Okay? Now, the research shows, okay, this is the product of many, many years of research, not just by me, but by many others, that when it comes to the economic contributions of immigrants, when immigrants arrive to your community, they bring five big economic inputs, okay? And those economic inputs are talent, investment, innovation, consumption, and taxes. Okay? Now, tell me which one of those you don't want for your community or your state or your country. If you don't want one of those, you're crazy. Okay? Because economic growth and prosperity and jobs are a function of those five inputs. And the story of salsa shows this perfectly. You have immigrants arrive in Brooklyn, okay? They bring their unique musical talents that get mixed with the talents of native-born musicians, okay? Out of that comes an innovation, a product and cultural innovation, salsa music. It gets commercialized through an investment in a business, Fania Records, okay? That business creates jobs, okay, for many people, not just for foreign-born people. By the way, what does that business do as it creates jobs and generates revenue? It pays taxes, okay? Um, and um, and so now there's more investment and more capital. And by the way, right, but because you're now booking concert venues, clubs are arising that play this kind of music, you get other new businesses, other investment, and so you get this virtuous cycle out of these five things that come because of something new that immigrants introduce. Okay, now whether you care about music or not, this is true in areas that are much more consequential for our well-being. Okay, and so immigrants introduce all kinds of new technologies. Immigrants are 80% more likely than native-born people to start businesses. Immigrants serve as magnets of investment by companies from their home countries. Immigrants pay, even though they're only 18% of the labor force in the US, they fill way more than 18% of jobs in critical sectors from farms to construction sites to nursing homes and hospitals, to technology firms. Immigrants pay, on average, each immigrant contributes $260,000 in net present value in taxes to American public coffers. And so you see these five things create great shared prosperity. And this is a win-win for all of us because when immigrants bring those five things, they don't just keep the benefits for themselves, the benefits spread to entire communities. Okay. And the benefits aren't just economic because think of, not just the economic effects that introducing salsa had, not just for Brooklyn or New York, but ultimately for the entire country. But think of the importance of the cultural contribution, right? How that musical genre made life more interesting, more worth living, increased the variety of things that people consume and enjoy spending their time on, and really contributed to keeping our culture vibrant and interesting um, in a way that wouldn't happen if you had just a more homogeneous population that's not growing and that is just imbued with the same ideas again and again. And so it's not just economic, but it's also cultural contributions that immigrants are bringing. And so to me, that's why this very simple story of salsa embodies so much of what immigrants bring to us. And the main point that I'm trying to make is that what my research and others' research shows is that immigration is good for us. Okay? So often when we talk about immigration, we tend to talk about it in one of two ways, and this is true in the United States and in every country in the world. There are basically two dominant stories about immigrants. The first one, which you're seeing a lot during this political season, is that immigrants are villains. They're here to steal your job, to undermine your safety. They're here to destroy the precious culture that you love so much. Okay, this is a story, of course, that's very familiar because it pays off politically, perhaps not usually with a majority, but with a large minority of people, to blame immigrants for our problems, right? They're the outsiders, they're the villains. Interestingly, the other main story about immigrants is not an antidote to the villain story. It's what I call the victim story. And this is best embodied in the United States by the Statue of Liberty, right? You probably all know Emma Lazarus's poem very well. Bring me your tired, your poor huddled masses yearning to be free. It paints a picture about immigrants as needy souls who we must pity. It paints a picture of nostalgia, perhaps, for past immigrants. And it tells us that it's the morally right thing to do to welcome immigrants, even if it costs us a lot. Now, there's nothing wrong per se with the immigrants as victims story in the sense that sometimes there really are immigrants that as they arrive, they are in need, okay? But we often don't think, we often assume that they're going to always be in need, okay? And so what happens is that these two stories, and people believe one or the other, create a contest between fear on the one hand and pity on the other hand. Okay? And when it comes to a political contest, pity never wins. Okay? Fear is much more powerful than pity when it comes to a political contest. And we end up with all these falsehoods and fear mongering about immigrants. But what I just shared, that simple story of salsa and the 5 economic benefits and cultural and other benefits that immigrants brings, tells us that actually immigrants don't need your fear and they certainly don't need your pity because immigrants are net positive contributors to everything that you want for your community to be prosperous and to be socially vibrant, right? And that's different because that's an appeal to your self-interest, to what's good for you and your children and grandchildren. And it's a win-win story instead of a win-lose or zero-sum story. That's really the gist of what the evidence tells us about immigration. And that's why, for those of you who are in the room and you see some of the copies of my book on the table, that's why the cover of the book is colorful and happy, right? And it has this imagery of a fence turning into birds because there's nothing to fear. There's a lot to be hopeful about. And that's not just a wishful statement, that's an empirical statement. That is what the data actually tell us. Okay. Two more things, and then I would love to open it up for a dialogue with you. Why is it so important for you and I to understand this right now? Right? Not just because we're going to go vote on Tuesday, but why is it so important right here and now? Um, I believe that we're in a moment that is very similar to exactly 100 years ago in 1924. You may or may not know that in 1924, in May of 1924, um, President Calvin Coolidge signed into law the National Origins Act, which was the most draconian immigration law in the history of the United States. It was a result of fear that the wave of immigrants from Southern and Eastern Europe that were arriving, as opposed to immigrants from Northern and Western Europe, were mentally, psychologically, morally, and economically inferior than the immigrants from the old stock. I'm talking about immigrants from Italy, from Greece, from Russia, from countries in Southern and Eastern Europe like that, that all of a sudden were feared because they spoke a different language, because they were Catholic and Jewish instead of Protestant, immigrants that were, according to the pseudoscience of eugenic, physically and mentally inferior. And somehow the argument was that they couldn't handle American democracy and that they would destroy our culture. Okay, now if that sounds familiar, it's because the exact same arguments that are being made today about Asians and Latin Americans were being made about Southern and Eastern Europeans exactly 100 years ago. And at that moment in time, fear, the villain message, beat out the pity message, and we created a law that decimated immigration for the next 40 years. Between 1924 and 1970, immigrants went from being 15% of the US population to less than 5%. And that caused tremendous economic and cultural harm to America that only started to be reversed after we started welcoming immigrants back again after 1965. And coincidentally, immigrants are about to reach about 15% of the population. And we're in a moment where we have to make a decision very similar to what we made 100 years ago. The difference is that we have much better information about the benefits immigrants bring and about the damage that would come if we kick them out or keep them out as we did 100 years ago. So that's why it's so important for us to be informed and for us not to fall prey to the villain victim dichotomy, both of which are false, and to instead understand that immigrants are good for us, right? Immigration is good for immigrants, but it's even better for us, is kind of the point. I think I'm going to stop there. I'm sure that a lot of you have questions. I have not addressed, for example, the issue of undocumented or illegal immigration. I think it's best if I address that during the questions about that that will surely arise. But thank you for listening to that preamble, and let's have a conversation now.
Okay, well, I'll start us off. Figure it's always hard, so, I think you explained that about bringing new knowledge and skills. Okay, right off the bat, there's a lot of talk whether undocumented immigrants pay taxes and receive social services. You write, the economy is increasingly dependent on immigrant taxpayers. Can you talk more about that?
Absolutely. Yeah, so let's talk about those two things, and let me address the issue of undocumented immigrants as a way to set the table for the other part. So when I say immigrants, economically speaking, bring those five things I mentioned, that's true of any immigrant, whether they arrive for humanitarian reasons, economic reasons, or even whether they cross the border illegally. Um, and that's just because all people bring those five things. Now, um, um, very briefly, why do we have so much undocumented immigration in the United States? Some people think because it's sort of bad apples, right? Bad actors that are crossing the border, and there are probably a few of those. But the reality is that we have somewhere between 11 to 13 million undocumented immigrants in the US. That's about a quarter of all immigrants. And so when a quarter of all the immigrants in a nation are here without authorization, that's a system problem. That tells you that there's something wrong. It's not a few bad apples, it's that we have a terrible system for bringing apples into the country, even though we need apples. Okay? And that's because the last time we updated the number and the types of visas that we allow in this country was in 1990. Before that, it was 1965. So we update that so infrequently that between 90 and 90 and now, everything has changed. Just think about how different our economy was. We couldn't have even had this meeting by Zoom, right? In 1990, we didn't even have the internet. Think about how different our demographic profile was, right? Our birth rates were above replacement then, they're below replacement. We weren't competing with China. We were just getting out of the Cold War. So everything has changed except our immigration system. And so when you have an economy that's more than double the size as it was in 1990 in a world that's so different, but you only allow a fixed number of visas since 1990, the discrepancy between the system and what we need both for economic and humanitarian and family reasons is so big that that gap is getting filled dysfunctionally by unauthorized immigration. Okay, and that is by the way, I'm not saying that that's the right way to do it. It would be better and the right thing to do if it were done through legal or authorized immigration. But we have to allow a lot more variety and number of visas to bring it up to what we really need, and then you would eliminate the problem of illegal immigration. So that's kind of a long-winded way to get into the second part of the question, which is that even unauthorized immigrants bring those five things and they actually pay taxes. And the way they do it is they have an individual taxpayer identification number. So instead of paying through a social security number, they pay through the ITIN. And they have a very strong motivation to do so because if they pay taxes, they can establish a record of being in the country, a record of employment, and that's very important for them to be able to, quote, get in line and enter the regular legal immigration system. Um, yeah, anyway, I don't know if I answered the full extent of the question, but I think I should take the next one at this point.
Does anyone have, I've got a list here, but if anyone would like to ask a question, okay.
Recently, I would say within the last 6 months to a year, Florida has really cracked down on this. Immediately, I saw in the news feeds, different ones, meaning that a lot of the immigrants just left their housing, went to Georgia, just said, we're done with it. And they said, you know, there was produce rotting in the fields. Are you starting to see the economic data and actual factual information come in about the effect of that draconian law?
Yeah, what happened is exactly what you said. We don't know, not yet. We haven't seen reliable numbers and reports on that, so I don't have those kinds of facts to give you. But that is exactly what happened, and I think that's a very good example of what happens when you either kick immigrants out or scare them away, including undocumented immigrants who are doing. So the issue is that many of the reason that we get so much undocumented immigration that plays an economic role is that there are many jobs that native-born people either will not do or for which there's not enough native-born people to do the work. This is especially true in critical areas like farm work, construction, household services, manufacturing, restaurants. Anyway, so much of it. And so when Ron DeSantis passed State Bill 1718, which was that draconian crackdown you mentioned, many undocumented immigrants left, but also many legal immigrants left because many undocumented immigrants are married to or are the parents of other legal immigrants. So entire families leave, right? So you don't just lose the undocumented immigrant, you lose the entire family. And so the workforce providing those essential skills and services was gone. And so literally you had construction sites that could not operate because you didn't have drywall installers, roofers, plumbers, etc. You had farms where you couldn't pick the produce. You had people who lost their nannies and therefore say the one of the spouses in that family could not go to work because the nanny was gone. And so the ripple effects are quite bad. And we've seen that not just in Florida, but we've seen it historically every time the US has limited immigration.
Oh, we got Clark over here.
Hi, next Wednesday, you're gonna be appointed in charge of all immigration in the United States. How would you
Great idea.
handle a system that would be beneficial to both the people coming in, the immigrants, and us?
Yeah, very good. One is, in some ways, I that would be very interesting if that were true. But let me just give you some examples of how messed up our system is. That system we haven't updated since 1990. If you are a farm owner and you need year-round farm workers, because you do now, right? In the 1950s, farming was a family business, right? The kids worked the farm. That's not the case anymore, right? Young people leave the farm and they don't work the farm. So the only people willing to do year-round farm work are foreign-born people. Do you know how many green cards there are available for year-round farm workers in the US? Zero. It doesn't exist. There is no line, right? So when you tell an undocumented farm worker, get in line, there is no line, okay? If you're an Indian engineer, right? So skilled person, very different than say a Mexican farm worker. You have skill, you're very in high demand in the US economy, and you're applying for an employment-based category 2 visa. That's one of the green cards that we give for skilled people. Do you know how long an Indian engineer has to wait in line for that visa? 195 years. Okay? And that wait is projected to go up to 437 years by 2030. Okay. And so our system has all kinds of crazy dysfunctions like that. And so I would make four changes. If I were appointed Wednesday, as you said, there are four big things I would change. The first one is I would remove the Department of Homeland Security as the one in charge of the immigration system. I mean, what does it tell you that DHS is in charge of immigration, right? The department that is here to protect us from threats, right? So we've already framed as a government, as a nation, immigration as a threat. So imagine instead if you put Department of Commerce in charge. Very different framing, very different mindset, right? The regulators in charge of making immigration rules and laws would be doing it in a way that is beneficial for us rather than just thinking kind of as a protective, kind of as a fear-based mindset. The second thing I would do is I would vastly increase the number of visas that we give of all kinds. Remember, in 1990, our economy was $9 trillion. Today, it's $25 trillion in size. So our economy is more than doubled in size, but the number of visas is held constant. That means that we need to at least double or triple the number of visas of all types that we give. Number three is that we need a greater variety of entry paths. Like I gave in the example with, there are no visas for year-round farm workers. There's no visas for a whole category of people that we need. There's no visas for carpenters. There's no visas for plumbers. There's no visas for so many kinds of people that we need. So we just need to not just elevate the number, but increase the variety of visas that we give. And number four would be that I would create provisions for us to update our system very frequently. It makes no sense that in 100 years, between 1924 and now, we've only had three reforms that significantly change the number and types of visas we give. It's ridiculous. I don't know what's going to happen in 40 years, so I can't set the number and types of visas for the next 40 years. I know Congress doesn't know that either. And so I would have provisions where we have to update those numbers and types at least every 3 years. And that way, the discrepancy between reality and the system doesn't get so big. Because the other problem with that is that now the discrepancy is so large and the politics are so divisive about how to fix that discrepancy that we can never get our act together. And you get this kind of immigration reform that always gets postponed because we can't agree. So making smaller reforms every fewer years will also avoid that political polarization. So if I get appointed Wednesday, that's the fourth, those are the first four things I do. Then we work out the other details later.
You spell your last name correctly so we can write it in.
I'm going to tell my kids that.
Um, Well, I'll ask another question. You mentioned about villains, right? So immigrants are cast as criminals. But in your book, you said the real national security is not allowing immigrants in. So how would you respond to someone with these concerns?
Yeah, thank you for bringing that. And by the way, thanks for reading the book. You clearly read it very carefully. So for an author, that's the best thing you can hear. Yeah, so there are basically three. So I hope I'm not being sacrilegious in front of a religious group, but there is a holy trinity of immigration concerns that anti-immigrant groups have. The number one concern is that immigrants commit crime and therefore endanger us. Nothing could be further from the truth. Of all the evidence we have about immigration, the fact that we are the most certain of is that immigrants have the lowest crime rate in the United States, especially undocumented immigrants. That's not because they're nicer people than the average person. By being undocumented, they have a very strong incentive not to be on the wrong side of the law, otherwise they'll get deported. And so and so, immigrants just actually reduce crime. And we see it in many different ways. They have the lowest crime rate. When immigrants arrive in a community, crime goes down or at least does not increase. They have the lowest incarceration rate of any group in the United States, and they always have. There's never been a time in history where immigrants have had a higher incarceration rate than native-born people. So you can take it to the bank that immigrants are not going to create crime in your community. Now, are there immigrants who commit crimes? Of course, there's people in any group that do, but their criminality rate is lower than any other group. But what I mean when I say that the real national security threat is not letting immigrants in, is that when we um, kick immigrants out or prevent them from coming in, we create a whole host of national security problems that are way worse than any crime that immigrants sometimes commit. If you watch the movie Oppenheimer, right, that was very popular last year, it popularized this idea, this threat that the Nazis might beat the US to developing the atomic bomb. And if you paid attention to that movie, most of the scientists that developed the atomic bomb were foreign-born people. Okay, imagine if those foreign-born talented people had not arrived. We would have lost the atomic bomb race. We would have lost the space race, by the way. Okay, because most of the people involved in getting us to the moon were also foreign-born scientists. And there's a whole set of areas of knowledge and technology that are essential to national security, where immigrants provide a disproportionate share of the talent. Right now, the one that's kind of top of mind for the US is AI. In the United States, 53% of people with PhDs in AI are foreign-born. 53%. Without foreign-born talent, you don't get ChatGPT, but you also don't get all the national security applications of AI that we use to protect against our geopolitical rivals. And so that's what I mean is actually by fear mongering and keeping talent out, we create national security threats that are really big, right? And that's the real safety problem when it comes to immigration.
How do your students respond to the message that you share with them? And does their response give you hope?
Yeah, thank you for asking that. That's not a question I get a lot. So, my students are, kind of, as a general rule, really, really, bright, open-minded people. And so they respond very well to facts and evidence, right? I mean, everything I have stated today is based on a lot of research evidence. It's not just one study or my opinion. And so I think, students who want to know the facts and the evidence respond well to that. I would say also I'm at a school and university that attracts a lot of international students, or where a lot of the students are the children of immigrants. So I think in some ways I'm preaching to the choir a little bit when I'm talking to them. But I'm aware that the University of Pennsylvania it does not reflect all universities. I have spoken at other campuses where there is a little bit more hostility toward the ideas that I talk about. But I will say that in general, students give me hope because young people tend to get it. And here's why. If you look in the US, there are two very strong predictors of people's attitude towards immigrants. So people that have the most negative attitudes towards immigrants live in places with the fewest immigrants, right? Not the opposite, right? You would think that if immigrants cause all these problems, people that live with more immigrants have more negative attitudes, but it's the opposite. So it's literally people who aren't around immigrants. And the other group that tends to have negative attitudes towards immigrants is older people. The older you are in America, the more negative your opinion toward immigrants. And those two things go together. It's because people who grew up kind of the baby boomers or the what is it the greatest generation, the generation before them, they grew up in a time where America had the fewest immigrants. And so what does this tell us? It tells us that people who are exposed to immigrants like them, right? And the story that Jess told, when you are exposed to these Venezuelan families that you're helping, you realize they're kind of good, normal people like everyone else. It's people who just aren't exposed to immigrants, who didn't grow up around them or who don't live in neighborhoods with many of them, that have this fear of the unknown. And so this is a roundabout way to answer your question, is that my students, right, people who are college age right now, they have grown up in a country that has a lot of immigrants. And so they realize that they're normal people like anyone else. And so I actually do have hope that that the next generations will be more tolerant just because of how they've grown up.
Greg, I think you had your hand done. You're done?
Sarah?
Okay, Sarah?
I feel bad asking this question after that nice hopeful answer.
No, please.
be a little out of the scope of your work, but immigrants are kind of uniquely susceptible to labor trafficking. I was wondering if you had anything to talk about how our policies specifically lead to that and how any changes might kind of help keep people safe.
Yeah, no, thank you for that. I mean, certainly we should be concerned about human trafficking and labor trafficking. They are important and non-trivial issues. I should be quick to say that the extent of those issues around immigration is much smaller than people realize, right? I mean, if you read the headlines, you somehow get the impression that, 80% of immigrants crossing the border are being trafficked or are traffickers or are bringing drugs or trafficking young women or children. I mean, it's a tiny issue in the grand scheme of things. It's of course an important issue. I'm not saying it doesn't matter, but it's a small issue. What you are correct about, though, is that many of our policies and our system make the problem worse because when you don't allow, um, when you don't have legal, orderly channels for people to come through, you will get irregular, disorderly channels, right? We know from research that one substitutes the other. When you make more legal paths available, illegal entries go down, and vice versa. And so I think, again, by not updating our system, right, by waiting, like sitting on our hands for 35 years without updating our system, the discrepancy between flows and what we allow becomes so large that there's just much more room in the middle for all these shenanigans, including trafficking. And so, it really kind of is urgent for our lawmakers to reduce that gap because once you control the flow legally, you don't leave as much scope for trafficking. That would be my statement on that.
Sarah, I think Sarah wanted to clarify a little bit.
So I think more of what I was asking was less immigrants being the people to traffic others and more immigrants who are here being the subjects of labor trafficking by their employer.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, very good. Yeah, and so the other thing is that so I said earlier that even undocumented immigrants contribute those five things, but by being here without documentation, they are subject to abuse, right? Getting paid below living wages. They don't have labor protection laws. If crimes are committed against them, they don't report them. So absolutely, illegality in the immigration system or being here without legal authorization opens you up to all kinds of abuses, including labor trafficking and labor abuses. Um, yeah, okay. Sorry if I misunderstood the question. But again, right? Why do we get so much illegal immigration in our labor force? Because of the discrepancy between the system and reality. And so if we make legal channels available, then the workers who are here, one, they're not afraid of reporting crimes against them because they're not afraid they're going to be deported. They can negotiate fair wages, and receive all the kind of labor protections that our law would offer for everyone else. Immigrants who are here without authorization are very afraid of interacting with law enforcement, just because they feel so strongly that they don't want to be deported, and that leads them to suffer more than they need to.
That's a question. I'm struck by the impact of your reframing around immigration policy rather than the Department of Homeland Security being managed by the Department of Commerce. And I'm looking at the subtitle of your book, Why Successful Societies Welcome Newcomers. I'm wondering, has immigration become so polarized and almost a pejorative term for so many that immigrants is there any intentional effort to reframe around newcomers versus immigrants? And how needed is that?
Yeah, I think it's sad, right? The I word has become like a bad word. And I don't see too much effort right now. If anything, it's kind of gone the other way. Now, I don't know what your politics are, and this is not a reflection of my politics, but I think it's a fair statement that what has happened as the Trump campaign has, kind of maintained its really negative rhetoric towards immigrants, they've kind of won the rhetorical battle in that they have actually moved the Harris campaign toward kind of a safety mindset, right? And nobody's speaking in positive terms about immigration. Notice that what Harris is proposing is basically border security and then makes sort of vague statements about we should be true to our heritage as a nation of immigrants. But she is not proposing a message that is about immigrants as value creators who bring jobs and innovation and all these things I've been talking about. So no, I'm actually seeing the rhetoric go in the other way, unfortunately. But let me give you a hopeful twist to that. What I just said is true at the federal level for federal politics. I interact a reasonable amount with officials at local level. So think of state, city, county, so whether it's Chamber of Commerce, mayors, governors' offices, and those people, they have to deal in reality. That is, they have to solve real problems. So meaning if a neighborhood is becoming depopulated and blighted, they realize immigrants are a solution to that. If a mayor realizes, oh, this factory down the road is closing because it can't find enough workers, immigrants are a solution to that. And so, for example, a good example of that is this what you saw in Springfield, Ohio, right? Federal level politicians attacking Haitians, and then the governor of Ohio, the mayor of Springfield, and the people of Springfield saying, foul, like we need these Haitians, right? They have kept our factories open. They are contributing a lot and speaking positively about these Haitians. And so at the local level, I do see a lot more positivity. A good example is in the state of North Dakota. They just opened an Office of Foreign Talent. Office of Foreign Talent. Notice that it's not an Office of Immigration, right? The label is Office of Foreign Talent, which tells you the political objective they have of attracting talent because they just don't have enough workers to fill key jobs. So below the federal level, I do see a lot of that, which is perhaps the hopeful way on which to end the answer.
Time for one more question.
Go ahead.
One more, put your predictor hat on, and would you say in 3 to 5 years that our sanctuary cities will actually see some very good economic outflows by us welcoming immigrants in?
Yes. I'll use Philadelphia as an example, which is one of the original sanctuary cities. Philadelphia, in the last 25 years, has experienced a revolution economically and culturally. Philadelphia was a city in decline, very classic Rust Belt city. For about 40 to 50 years, it suffered population decline, economic blight, loss of jobs. It was not a good place to be. And by the year 2000, immigrants were less than 6% of Philadelphia's population, which is way, way below the national average. And in the last 25 years, immigrants have now gone up to nearly 16% of the Philadelphia population, which is above the national average. And it's no coincidence that and part of it is because Philadelphia officially became a sanctuary city. It sent the message that it was a welcoming place for immigrants of all backgrounds. It started doing simple things like offering government materials in different languages, etc. And Philadelphia, the economy is doing very, very well. And most of the new businesses, for example, more than a third of all business owners in the city are foreign-born people. About a third of the workforce is foreign-born. About a little over a third of all taxes in the city of Philadelphia are paid by immigrants. A lot of the investment Philadelphia is getting is from the countries that the immigrants are coming from. And so again, you're just getting those 5 benefits that I talked about in the beginning. So yeah, I think it's one of those things that with patience, with years, you do see the benefits very clearly, and you don't see more crime or any of the negative things that sometimes are claimed. If anything, you see a reduction of that just because the economy and the society are more vibrant, and that tends to kind of shoo away criminal elements.
Thank you, Zeke. I've been reminded we have one question in our chat, which is about are there any upcoming bills that you know about in legislative sessions around immigration that we should be paying attention to?
Well, yeah, you should pay attention to them. I would say the most notorious one is the security bill that the Biden administration tried to pass, which was, I think, blocked by Donald Trump. I mean, he said that he blocked it, so I think I can say that confidently. So pay attention to that. Now, is that bill better than nothing? Yes, but I think the problem with that bill is that it's an enforcement only bill. That is, it's sort of adding more cops at the border, so to speak. Um, but it's not changing the number and types of visas very much. It is increasing them by a little bit, but not nearly enough what we need. So the problem is that enforcement only doesn't work because it doesn't address this pressure, this gap that I've been talking about between what we need and reality. So if you keep enforcing a system that doesn't make sense, you just increase the pressure points for unauthorized immigration, and you don't solve the problem, and then you just get more angry, and and everyone gets more angry because you're like, wait, we spent all these resources on security, and we're not seeing the crisis of unauthorized immigration be solved. So again, if I were elected, a week from now, I would say, fine, I'll accept the enforcement, but only if we also are enforcing a number and types of visas that make sense. Otherwise, we're not fixing the problem. So as a voter, speak to your legislator and be wary of enforcement only bills.
Thank you. I want to invite Jess, our other co-chair with the Migrant Interest Group, to give us our marching orders, some ideas about what to do.
Thanks, Zeke. We could all we learned a lot. I'm almost done with your book, and it's been amazing. I've been listening to it. Most people have to listen to books, so if you want to get it on Audible, that's a great thing to do. But we also have the books here, so we have 7. If anybody wants to talk to Jack afterwards and get one of those books, that would be really great. So that's one of your marching orders, is to read the book. But also, after you gain information, you just don't keep it to yourself. So share the information with others and keep learning. Right, this is a very complex issue, as you can tell. We want all of us to stay open in this issue, especially when you're having conversations with other people who talk about this being such a polarizing issue. We want to be able to listen to other people and their concerns, as well as sharing what we've learned and sharing the research. One of the things that would be great if you wanted to join the Migrant Interest Group here at St. John's, or if you're at another church and or work somewhere else, to create a group where you're at as well. So we need lots of people in this space to do the work together. We also, if you would like to volunteer with supporting families in our community, we can help plug you into opportunities to do that. One of the ways, before I got here, I got a text and somebody said, Jess, the leaves are falling in my yard and I can't keep up with them. So creating work for migrants that don't yet have their work permits. So raking leaves, cleaning house, all those things that you don't necessarily have time to do. Let us know. We might be able to hook you up with a migrant that needs that work. There are a lot of organizations here in Denver and in Colorado. They're doing the good work. I was just going to list some, and if you want to put them in the chat too for folks. Together Colorado is a great group that advocates in our community, as well as Casa de Paz is doing the work. Rocky Mountain Immigrant Advocacy Network is doing great work. Papagayo, Mango House, there are so many. So definitely get plugged into one of those organizations. Lastly, I'm really happy to announce that one of the migrant families that we have been working with this past year, their son is being baptized at St. John's on Sunday at the 10:30 service. So if you'd like to come to that celebration, watch Jose Miguel get baptized. And we're going to have a little party of celebration for Jose afterwards. So you can come and join that. I think that's it. We thank you all for coming, and we thank you so much, Zeke, for being with us.
Thank you. Thank you. I really enjoyed it.
Thank you all. Yes, let's do that. Let's close with a quick word of prayer, and then let's see if we can get a photo with Zeke. Let us pray. Loving God, we give you thanks for this time together, for Zeke and his work, for listening and curious hearts. And God, we ask that your Your holy and life-giving spirit may so move every human heart, especially the hearts of the people of this land, that barriers which divide us may crumble, suspicions disappear, and hatred cease, that our divisions being healed, we may live in justice and peace through Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen.
Amen.
Thank you, Zeke. All right.
You can take a picture.
All right. So Zeke, if you're okay with the photo, we'll do that. Thank you all for coming very much. God bless you.
Longest arms.
Yeah.
Clark's our photo man. Clark's our photo man because Clark doesn't take photos.
Here,
So.
we can hold up the books too.
We all want to proceed.
Thank you. Can I make a very humble request?